All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get this thing rolling. Once again, for those who are currently just joining, I'm here with John True and Kevin Davis. We're going to talk about the new new comprehensive rule package that was set into place over the past couple months. If y'all have any questions, please submit them in the panel on the GoToWebinar. There should be a spot where you can submit them, and we'll be happy to answer them at the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin and John.
Grayson, thanks, and thank you everybody for taking the time today to join us. My name is John True. I'm the president of TDA with Kevin Davis, CEO of Deer Breeders Corp. We've spent a lot of time together since March of this year, and have obviously kind of been in the mix on a daily basis. Everything that you see that was at the bottom of that the email that went out, we're working with a PR firm out of Austin now, and they're called Mach 1, and they helped us put together that kind of educational flyer, if you will, to explain kind of the differences and the increases in surveillance, or the changes, I guess, in the rules. We knew that there was increased surveillance coming, and we'd hoped to just get by with just what we fought for was just, we knew what was coming on the increases of surveillance, but we hoped that those increases would suffice and not have any need for an antemortem test prior to release on animals. We got behind most of those increases like I said, in lieu of having the antemortem requirement. But what was ultimately passed our way was all of the above, all of the increases plus the antemortem testing prior to release. So I will, like I said, Kevin, can you hear me? Are you on?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Echo what you just said. We worked real hard to provide confidence to Parks and Wildlife that our herd surveillance program was working as intended. They, however, chose to go with the strictest approach that they could really possibly do, and that's kind of how we landed where we're at today.
Right. So we'll walk through just you can follow along on the flyer just on what was previously stated as the rules and what the new rules are, and then we've got, as Grayson said, please keep questions coming. I think we have a handful of questions that we will just run down. But to start it off, the largest rule that we had, which had only been in place for 9 days, was on March 14th of this year, the Parks and Wildlife Commission passed a rule that took a post-mortem submission sample submission down from a year down to 14 days. We never really knew how important that was until facility 1 and 2 had 5 positives that popped in March of this year. The earliest one that died was in September. So we clearly see the need of having timely submission of samples. But that being said, the federal rule is 7 days. And so most of everything you see going forward was a way to organize the two programs, being Parks and Wildlife and Animal Health Commission. Before this rule package came out, it was somewhat confusing. We had some people testing 80% of 16 months and older, and some testing 100% of 12 months and older, and all that stuff. So most of these rules you'll see just bring consistency between the two platforms. So 14 days submission, but when an animal dies to turn in a post-mortem sample is going to 7 days. In the past, you could turn in an OBEX or a lymph node sample. Now you need to do both, OBEX and lymph node. The live testing makeup, and some of these I'm going to go through them, and we'll touch on this because we have several questions about these. So I'm not just racing through them, but a 3-to-1 testing on missed mortalities is going to go to 5-to-1, and we'll get into that on a couple of the questions. Meaning, if you've missed a mortality prior to this year, you could turn in 3 antemortem test to suffice for that one missed mortality. Now that is going to be 5. That was something that was established in 2016 when we got the then new rules, and that number, there was nothing real scientific about how the 3 to 1 was picked. And so I think this is just a way to increase that. The minimum annual mortality was another one of the 2016 rules that they came out and said that an average farm, on average, a farm should lose 3 points, or it was actually 4.5%, and 80% of that under those rules is 3.6%. So that's how we got that annual, minimum mortality number. That will be increasing to 5%. Again, we'll touch more on this on some of the questions. As I said, before all this happened, we had 2 platforms, being Texas Parks and Wildlife and Texas Animal Health. Texas Parks and Wildlife rules were 80% testing of mortality 16 months and older, and Animal Health was 100% testing of all mortalities 12 months and older. The two are going to align with each other, and everybody will, doesn't matter if you're in Animal Health or not, but it's going to be 100% testing of all mortalities 12 months and older. The Triple T permit program is a program that's out there that a lot of people utilize. That trap, transport, and transplant permit is used by breeders. It's used by non-breeders, but it's a way to move animals from one site to another. And I think they see the hypocrisy, I guess you could say, in the 2 platforms. If it's a concern about us breeders moving deer across the country, across the state, it's hard to say that they're going to allow the Triple T permit program to be running parallel to that without having some kind of level of testing involved with that. And they've committed to the commission that they will present some possible rules for that to get that program back active in January, at the latest March, on the commission meetings. We actually have a CWD task force and the Whitetail Deer Advisory Committee meeting set up the first couple of weeks of January, and Kevin and I will be in attendance at both of those. So yeah, and the largest one of this obviously is this. Beforehand we had no live testing prior to movement, and now any animal, every animal going to a release site has to have a antemortem test on it. And an animal, the youngest an animal can qualify to be tested on a live test is 6 months old. So it just means no animals can really be released unless they're 6 months old or older and with a live test. Kevin, anything to add before we get into the questions?
No, that's very, very, very well. Very good.
Okay. All right. So Kevin and I will both kind of answer some of these. Our first question comes from Mark Marshall, and thanks to anyone that submitted questions. We really appreciate it. So I'm going to just read the question, and then we'll kind of go over it because I think it'll apply to a lot of different people. So Mark says, I am considering adding some better genetic buck and doe pen deer to my ranch in Frio County. How do I get comfortable with buying deer and then the ranch that I purchased them from gets a CWD positive? The stories I have heard, they would come and kill all my deer. To me, that is the craziest thing that Parks and Wildlife are doing to the landowner. I've heard this through friends and wonder why it is kept a secret to most landowners in Texas. I would think the public would be outraged that one deer was positive and the 250 deer that were killed are all negative. Please help me out with this because I will need some deer soon. Thanks. So, Mark, this is a great question, and I think it's something that has bothered me since March of this year, because this isn't the first time we've had CWD in a deer breeder pen. How it works right now is we have a trace out period of 60 months, and that basically just means if there is a CWD positive at a deer breeding facility, They go through there, and anybody that's bought an animal or brought an animal in from that breeder within the last 60 months has to kill that animal and test it for CWD. And, I started asking, I mean, the day after all this stuff happened with Parks and Wildlife staff, I just asked, we had this back in 2015, and I can tell you from personal experience, I had an animal that I had bought from that specific ranch, and I had to kill it within a couple of months of even after it had come into our facility. What you're talking about is out on a pasture, not in a breeding facility. The same rules apply. There is a rule in place where there's a 60-month trace out, and if you brought an animal in from a breeding facility that has a CWD positive within 60 months, you are supposed to go find that animal, test it, kill it, and test it. The science doesn't back up that time frame anymore. I mean, that time frame has been in existence since 2002. It basically just doubled the amount of time that was scientifically proven that an animal could live with CWD, which was 30 months. And so this is a big part of it for us. It's definitely, I don't know if I agree that it's been kept secret, but I think it's a horrible system. I want to make sure you understand the rules don't call for them coming and killing every one of your deer. If you bought, let's just say you bought 10 bred does from a facility 3 years ago, and they have a positive, they're going to come looking for those 10 specific does. And if you can't find those 10 specific does or 10 specific bucks or whatever it was, then there are herd plans that go into effect on those release sites. And currently, the standard herd plan is they will keep you non-movement qualified until you turn in 60 post-mortem hunter harvest tests. If you cannot find those 10 specific animals, or how many ever animals we're talking about that were originally brought in from that facility that ended up having a positive. So there's nothing that calls for them coming in killing everything. I can tell you from my personal feelings, this is something that we're really focused on trying to get something changed on that trace out period. And I think, it's something that we're hopefully going to address. We definitely have the attention of our elected officials. And I think that's the only way we're really going to affect any change there is next legislative session. And, if we can reduce that down from 60 months to something that makes more scientific sense, it's a win. But that is the rule. Kevin, you want to add anything to that?
So the other thing that I'd like to point out is, although we advocated for a different outcome on these rules, there is a lot of surveillance being done now in the pens and prior to release. So you as a purchaser should have some comfort that now that we've gone to 100% testing, that you're actually purchasing less risky animals. The second thing is, John touched on the fact that if there was an outbreak, that you would have to present that animal or get a herd plan. So testing that animal, if it were to be harvested, would be something that you would want to do also, just to protect yourself downrange.
Right. Okay. Again, if there's any follow-up questions, please submit them. Question number 2 comes from Keith Rio. Keith, thank you for the question. He says, if I didn't have any mortalities in my pen for the year, why do I need the live test at a 5-to-1 ratio now that we are being forced to live test 100% of the deer we intend to transfer? Again, what is the point of movement qualification if we have to test 100% of the deer we intend to transfer? So, Keith, and we'll touch on this on the next question, it looks like as well. This is all about having annual surveillance in your pens. If you don't have any mortalities, Parks and Wildlife is not, they're pledging to us, they're not going to penalize you for good animal husbandry practices. And so all we can do is take their word for that. They're not requiring you to kill animals to be tested. But there is some annual surveillance that is necessary to make sure that CWD doesn't exist in your breeding pens. And I think everybody can understand that. Obviously, when you go to turn out animals, yes, you do have to have live tests done on them. But in your scenario, I know you don't have a whole lot of deer there in pens, but at a 5-to-1 ratio, they're going to get there's going to be a pretty good look into your percentage wise into your specific facility to give confidence that CWD doesn't exist there. Kevin, anything else there? I think the next one touches on it as well.
Yeah, that was well stated.
Okay. Question 3, it says, what if you have, and so I just keep in mind that I had this exact scenario that I called Parks and Wildlife staff and walked them through this just to make sure I understood. But it says, what if you have 50 deer and the new 5% mortality rate owed to the state says you should have had 2.5 deaths, which everything rounds up. So that means 3 deaths if you have 50 deer. That reporting year, you only had 1 death. 70% of 3 is 2.1. Are they expecting us to kill 2 additional healthy deer to fulfill this rule that the 5% expected mortality rate be satisfied with a minimum 70% postmortem test? They plan to not allow us to live test to fulfill their 5% rule with a requirement that 70% must be postmortem death. Are we going to be forced to kill healthy deer before the end of year reporting is filed to make sure we satisfy 70% of required postmortem tests? This definitely doesn't seem fair at all. So that came from Tim. Tim, thank you. No, the answer is no, they're not. I mean, I had this exact scenario that I called Parks and Wildlife staff and just wanted to make sure I understand it. And as I said just a minute ago, they have told me they're not going to penalize you. I think this is going to be something they look at over a multi-year time period. If a guy that in that scenario that you throw out there with 50 deer, I think at some point you're going to have a death. I don't think 2 or 3 years in a row if you not have a death. I think this all this means is 70%. It's 70% of your death tests have to be of your tests have to be postmortem. As I said, there will be no requirement now. That's just something they're telling us of killing animals to penalize you for practicing good animal husbandry. Kevin, what else there?
So we have asked these questions over and over again, and John and I have got the same answers that, hey, they're not going to require you to destroy animals. And we need your information to help ensure that is actually the way they're going to do business at Parks and Wildlife. So if anyone is experiencing answers differently by staff or being asked to comply by killing animals, we need to know that immediately, and we will clarify that both at Parks and Wildlife, and we will also make sure that our state representatives and senators understand that as well. So.
Right. The next question comes from Chuck Bullard. Chuck, thank you for the question. It says, please explain rules 3, 4, and 6, what these mean to a new deer breeder. So rule 3 deals with the 3-to-1 live testing makeup on missed mortalities going to 5-to-1. I think we touched on that a little earlier, just on annual surveillance. What we don't want is, or the scenario that happened in the Duval County, where we had a breeder that had historically never met his postmortem sampling. I think in a 5-year period, he had a total of about 45 deaths over that 5-year period, and I believe he had 4 postmortem results on file. And so every year he did a 3-to-1 live testing makeup, and I think I could be off a few, but I believe he had around 100 adult deer every year, and so that just meant he was supposed to have 4, post-mortem death, submissions every year, and when you don't have any at a 3-to-1, that's 12 samples, and so I think. I think we saw. We saw our system in place working this year because he intended. He was non-movement qualified over the summer, and every year was the same thing. In August of every year, he would go out and put tranquilize whatever animals he was, numbers he needed to get back to movement qualified status, so he could turn bucks out. And so that was the same thing that happened this year. We saw the 3-to-1 live testing program in place for him. I believe he tested 12 does to get back to movement qualified so he could turn out bucks. And one of those does ended up being a positive sample. And so that going forward, that's going to 5-to-1. And that's the main, from previous to new rules. That's, I don't know how else to explain that. The rule 4 deals with the minimum annual mortality rate. And again, all of these that we're talking about from previous to new rules is just all about increased surveillance, right? I mean, we had a system in place that at the end of the day wasn't getting adequate surveillance per Parks and Wildlife and Animal Health, and so these are all just increases. So that scenario that I just talked to you about, let's just compare the two. A guy that has 100, adult animals on the old system, they would have said you need to have 4 deaths, and if you don't have any deaths in a 3-to-1 sample, you would have tested 12. Going forward, that same guy that's got 100, it's now 5% mortality, so it's 5, and 5-to-1 means 25. So you go from having 12 to 25, and you can just tell from a percentage standpoint, that's a quarter of that guy's herd that they're going to be getting annual surveillance to make sure that CWD doesn't exist in those pens. And I think that's the reason for the increase there. Rule 6 deals with the Triple T permit program, and as I said earlier, this is the Triple T program is a program that's in place that's used by landowners across the state, including some breeders that have release sites where they're removing excess does or animals from their specific release site and sending them elsewhere to someone else. That program is currently suspended, and I think, as I said, we should be hearing some proposed rules that go into place that would put that program back into active mode. I can only assume that it's going to require antemortem testing of animals prior to movement, just consistent with what the breeders have to do on any animals going. Kevin, anything else there?
So the Triple T, the I guess the hold on the Triple T program right now was done because they were making so many rules on deer breeders. So they put that on hold. It was kind of they really didn't feel comfortable leaving it open. And that, I don't really know what to expect when we get to the meetings in January, but we can expect that to have an increased surveillance component to it at all.
Yeah. Okay. Question 5 comes from Monty Irvin. Monty, thanks. It says, can I release 6-month-old fawns to a release site without an antemortem test? Monty, you have about 2 days left to do that, roughly. We've been telling people from the get-go to release those fawns while they can. We're under the emergency rule right now, which states that any animal 9 months and older that you plan to send to a release site needs a antemortem test, a not detected antemortem test on it. The new rules, as I said earlier, we walked through that. It's all animals need an antemortem not detected test prior to being released, and the youngest an animal can be tested is 6 months old. So as it stands right now, these rules are set to go into effect, I believe, the 19th of this month. Anything you want to do, yes. Can you turn out a fawn right now without an antemortem test? Yes, you can. I would make sure that's done by Friday at the latest, if you plan to turn anything out. But that under the emergency rules, emergency order in place right now, that is the truth. That's what you can do right now. But as of when these rules go into effect, nothing can be turned out without an antemortem test, period. And you cannot turn out you can't test an animal that's younger than 6 months. So you got to wait till an animal is at least 6 months old or older, and it has to have a not detected antemortem test to be turned out. The next question comes from Jeff Dean. Thanks, Jeff, for submitting it. And this is a great question. It's what, if any, benefit is there to being in the Texas Animal Health Commission program at this point, outside of doubling the paperwork and the inspections? Jeff, this is a great question, and it's really, I think it's up to each individual farm. Personally, we are enrolled, have been enrolled for 15 plus years. Never intended to sell animals outside of Texas. I've always looked at it as an insurance policy. I don't have a crystal ball as far as what's coming in the future. I would hope that one day that we get down the road a year and a half, 2 years, and we've had to live test every one of these, and I pray that we don't have any positives that pop up there, and we've got something to stand on. And so, to me, what has always made sense was if you were going to have any kind of antemortem testing requirement, if you're a truly certified, farm in that program, that I don't think you should have to antemortem test if you checked all the boxes on everything you can do. Now, is that on the table right now? Absolutely not. But that's my hope down the line. Now, we'll hear different things about, facility one was a certified farm. Well, not really. As we look back into it, that the ability to, having banking samples, it doesn't follow the federal guidelines to be a certified farm. So I hope that there's some definition understanding of what truly it means to be a certified herd, and not have commingling of any other species, and submit all of your samples, 100% testing of all mortalities 12 months and older, and just have a paper trail of what that really means, because I feel like it could be valuable. The other thing is, so we've heard different things about, if and when CWD were to hit someone in a deer breeding pen, can they qualify for indemnity if they're not in the program? And the answer to that, who I've asked Sean Schaefer, is yes, you can qualify. It's just, if you're in the animal health program, you go to the top of the list. You're at the top of the list to get qualify for indemnity. And if you're not in the animal health certified federal program, you're at the bottom of the list. So it's just, like, as I said, an insurance policy going forward, that if it does happen to you and you wanted to qualify for that, then it puts you in line for it at least. Now, hypothetically speaking, who knows? This year we've got several farms that are in line, and I know facility 1 and 2 has now been depopulated, and that was kind of waiting for some of those indemnity funds as well. So that's clarification. So I don't have a great response to that. I can just tell you from my personal experience, we only have about a third of the breeders in the state right now that are signed up under the federal animal health program. I myself, TWIMS is a great tool. When I get my animal health, renewal document every year, it comes, and it used to be pretty overwhelming to me as far as looking at all the paperwork and kind of accounting for all the animals over the last year. And so what I started doing about 5 years ago was I just, I printed off my current inventory from Twins and would print off all of my transfer permits and print off all of my post-mortem test results from TVMDL, and I just put it in a package and mail it back to Animal Health Commission, and in a couple of weeks I'm approved. So for myself, personally speaking, it's not a huge hassle. Now, our local vet comes out and does the inspection annually for us. So it's not a huge problem for me. As I said, I look at it as an insurance policy. I hope it's worth something one of these days. Right now, it's not worth anything, other than getting you in line if there is a need for indemnity or whatever. But everybody has their own decision to make in that. And if you think it's too overbearing, and it's too much of a hassle to do another set of paperwork or to print off another thing to send to them, then by all means, it's not a requirement to be in that program. Kevin, anything I missed there?
I think one of the things that the program offers is solidarity, at least in the pens, across the other states, meaning that the program is mirrored. It's monitored by the USDA and applied evenly across the states, at least while those deer are in the pens. And so, it offers a level of insurance if a governing body in a specific state wants to be more stringent, the higher the membership, and they're going, no, this is the standard in the industry, offers some layer of protection there also.
Yeah. Had another question, and I want to add something also, but for live testing, how often can you test an eligible age deer under the new rules? There is nothing in place as far as, if I intend, what we left out earlier is that live test that you run is going to have a value for 8 months now, right? So you're going to be able to, we had some unfortunate timing this summer, having to test 12,000 bucks from June 22nd to roughly September 1st, probably. In that it was the heat of the summer and bucks were, 30% grown out, and it's tough time. Going forward, there is an 8-month window that test is good for, meaning you can now test your bucks in late January to ship them, to sell them in by the middle of September. So that's a workable deal, and we can get around that. This question deals with how often. So let's say I wanted to test that animal to sell it, and I didn't end up. Let's just say it was a doe, and I tested her in late January, and I didn't end up selling her by the time that 8 months was up, or after it was up, but it was within 12 months. There's no rule in place. In fact, I mean, you're giving them more surveillance. You're just going to need to test her again if you intend to sell that animal, if that 8-month window has gone up. So on the old rules, I think there's some confusion as far as the 3-to-1, now 5-to-1 live testing makeup. In the old way, you could only test an animal once every 2 years. That's being used for that deal. This live testing, if it's used for missed mortality, that from 2 years has now gone to 1 year. But it's apples and oranges if you're talking about an animal that you intend to sell. If you're going to sell an animal, you can test that animal as many times as you want, or twice, I guess, in that calendar year, if it's going to a release site, as long as if it's missed that 8-month window. Kevin, anything else there?
No, that's right.
All right, so I've had another question. It says, what's going to eliminate positive CWD tests if there are no true monitoring for exotic susceptible species animals in Texas and the transportation of these animals? Seems they are buying whitetail breeders because we have a good monitoring tool, TWIM. I think that's exactly right. Exotics in the state are under the oversight of Texas Animal Health, it's amazing to me the differences that occur. If I wanted to go buy any exotic species, I could pretty much go find anything out there right now and bring it in by the end of the day, with no real monitoring out there. On the CWD susceptible species, you've got elk, red deer, sika. There are somewhat rules that are in place that if you have those on your release site or on your ranch, then you're supposed to test the first three that are harvested. What kind of enforcement is involved with that? I don't know of any, to be honest. So I don't know that there is an answer. I don't know that I can adequately answer this question other than that's exactly right. There is no true monitoring of exotic species. We had Charlie Seal, who's the executive director of the Exotic Wildlife Association, this summer during the process of one of our CWD task force, threw out the scenario of more equitable testing across the landscape. And right now, whitetail breeders are the only entity that have mandated testing. But he threw out a scenario where they would offer up testing every susceptible species this year in Texas if the same would happen if we would test every hunter harvested deer, whitetail deer. It got no traction. I'll let clearly that doesn't make any sense to not that if someone's willing to kind of throw that out there, but it got no traction and it went nowhere. So I don't know that I can adequately answer that. Kevin, any flavor there?
Yeah, there's not a great answer. You touched on it very well. There's not a adequate enforcement arm over there at Animal Health. So it really doesn't matter what rules they put on exotic susceptibles. They don't have anybody to monitor the program.
Right. We've had another question about just clarifying what we just talked about. It is confusing with seeing the months and all that stuff. So to be very clear, no animal can leave without a test, and that animal has to be 6 months old or older to be able to be tested. That being said, once it's tested, that animal has that piece of paper that says not detected on that antemortem test. That's good for 8 months. So you have 8 months to move that animal. Meaning, under my example earlier, I'll tell you from my personal experience, we plan to move all of our bucks by the middle of September. So I'm going to back that up 8 months, and I'm going to try to get them done in the January, February timeframe myself, to give myself those 8 months of value there, so I can do it when it's better weather, less stress, all that. So I hope that clarifies that. But eight months of life on a not detected antemortem test. And not that it's been asked, but I know we dealt with it this summer. There is, on animals to be moved to a release site, there is no grace on, insufficient test results. If you want to move, if you're going to sell $30 this fall and you get 27 tests back that are not detected and 3 of them say insufficient, those 3 have to be retested. There is no grace for insufficient follicles or whatever. So, Kevin, anything else there?
No, sir.
Okay. Then another question talks about is the time that 8 months started from when sample was collected or when results were provided. My understanding that it's when the results are provided. Kevin, do you agree with that?
I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, those are all the questions that I have received. Is there anyone else that would like to answer? We've probably got about 10 to 15 more minutes left of our panel. So if anyone has anything else, please send it over to me. I see one coming in here.
I did talk with a question about the reagent. Or Grayson, maybe mute your phone real quick.
Say that again. Oh, sorry.
Just
yeah.
I talked with Dr. Terry Hensley yesterday with TVMDL. They found the replacement staining reagent, and they have been using it. It was only approved by the USDA on the 2 new machines that were added this summer, and so they're processing samples on the 2 new machines. He's hopeful that in the next day or so that they'll have USDA approval on the 3 older machines there, so they can ramp up capacity there at TVMDL. But it is focused. I told him I have 4 or 5 postmortem samples that are sitting there right now. So they are going back and handling the ones that have been there the longest to try to get caught back up, to make sure we have kind of current surveillance, and anything else as was mentioned on that email from them. Anybody that has a need to move deer right now and it's urgent, he said they really haven't had many calls about that. But they do have a lot of tests to get through currently, and as I said, 2 of the 5 machines are up and running currently, and the hope is definitely by the end of this week to have all 5 of their machines up and running. Kevin, anything else there?
Yep.
So we have one. What is the purpose of having the veterinarian and animal health certify your pen? I think I can only assume that it's just for understanding your population and your pens, and making sure that we're organized on all fronts. That's we have my local vet comes out once a year, and we go through every single ear tag to account, for those animals that are on my inventory, and I can only assume that that's it's just for making sure that inventory jives with what's in the twin system. So we got one here. Kevin, why don't you handle one of those questions?
Yeah, so I saw the question coming in from Mr. Ramsey. When is a sample deemed submitted for 7-day rule? That's when it's actually received at TVMDL. So it's not, it has to be received within 7 days of the death over at TVMDL.
Okay. Ashton Lawson, I'm a new deer breeder and do not currently have the ability to pull CWD samples myself. We're currently having our vet pull them all to ensure compliance. Will there be animal health sample class at the February meeting? Yes, there will be, and I believe there will be one at the DVC sale, although I'll let Kevin.
Yeah, yes, you can register for the sampling class now on our website over at DVC at our sale as well.
Right. So both we have 2 opportunities coming up. I know the TDA event is the 4th and 5th of February. Kevin, when's the DVC?
14th of January.
January. Okay. So Ashton, you should have 2, and you can reach out to both of our offices if you have any issue signing up for those classes. But 2 good opportunities to get certified. And we had another question about individuals other than vets getting trained to pull the antemortem samples. That's a question I have myself, and I've got that into it right now. I don't have the answer to that yet. I will hopefully get that shortly. But that would be a huge benefit if we could get certified to pull some of those. And so we will get that answer out. Kevin, you don't have any other answer on that, do you?
Not yet. Still working on it. So,
but it's something we've asked about. We will get clarification on that and report back when we do. So Kyle Kane asks, are there any proposed rules on testing low fence deer in the future? There is not. There is a voluntary program right now outside of, there are certain areas of the state where there are surveillance zones set up around facilities that had CWD, either deer breeding facilities, release sites, or low fence free range. You'll see that in the Medina County area. You'll see it in the Del Rio area. We're seeing it in the Hunt County area. For some reason, there's not one in Duval County area. So there is required testing, and if you're in those surveillance zones, required as in hunter harvest, everything that is hunter harvested if you're in a surveillance zone is required testing. Outside of that, we proposed what we thought were some common sense proposals that came out of kind of the mind of one of the commissioners up there about using the MLD program. We have 12,000 MLD permit holders in the state annually. Can we come up with something that is a requirement of that program to stay in that? And so we proposed having five tests from each MLD permit holder. That would give at least 60,000 tests this year, we're averaging 10 to 13,000 outside of deer pens annually, with I believe 27% of those numbers come from MLD properties. The others basically are roadkill, and some hunter harvest inside surveillance zones, and a few other hunter harvest out there. So to answer your question, there is nothing in place to deal with it in the future. It does. I definitely share the frustration. We're being treated like this is a very scary, dangerous disease, but it's not really being taken that way outside of deer pens. We're continually told that there is you don't have to test as many outside of deer pens to have the confidence that it exists, that it doesn't exist on the landscape. But again, we've seen otherwise. The opposite happen in Lubbock County this year. I mean, we had a visibly clinically sick whitetail or mule deer that was reported to Parks and Wildlife. They came out, euthanized it, and tested positive. So had that citizen not called and reported that visibly clinical animal on the landscape, right now we would be being told that there is a confidence that CWD doesn't exist in Lubbock County. So it clearly that system clearly is not working to kind of how it's being presented. But that being said, all we can do is continue to bring it to the attention of everybody else, and hope that there's some fairness brought in at some point if we're being required to test everything. But to answer your question, no, there's nothing in the future. So we have another question. Is there any way to schedule another time to get certified besides at an event to get certified in removing samples? I know a lot of managers and people can't always go to events. Can we reach out to our local animal health agent? Yes, I think we can, and I think that would be. I think it's a great idea to have a relationship with there are, I believe, 5 regional directors in animal health, and I think it makes sense to reach out to your specific person in your region and ask that question. We will do that on your behalf also but I think it makes sense to also have just a good, working relationship with them and ask the question: is there a chance we can get certified, other than having to take off time and go to one of these industry events? So, great question. Well, we'll look into that ourselves, but I recommend each farm do that as well. And another question here, if you have a pen of deer and you test half of them and you put them back in the pen with the other deer, how do you know that the other deer didn't infect them during the time you were waiting for results? Well, I would hope that your annual surveillance gives you, gives you confidence that you don't have CWD inside your pens. But again, I can't. I want to make sure you understand these aren't our rules. We didn't come up with needing to antemortem test and trying to figure out how to make sense out of all that. We're just passing them along. But that it's an interesting question. I think the answer is I don't. As I said, you've got annual surveillance on your specific farm. That should give you confidence that CWD doesn't exist on the landscape there. And it's my personal opinion that should be the only thing you need at a certain level, right? I mean, if you've got that much surveillance on an annual basis, we're seeing that how it happened this year. At facility 3, for instance, we had a farm that was following this time protocol without it being in place yet, that immediately sent in a sample upon the death of that animal. That animal was tested. It tested positive. They shut down movement and did the 60-month trace out that we talked about earlier. That farm has no trace positive animals. This disease was caught in a timely manner per our current rules. And that's something that we continue to bring up with anyone who will listen. But again, I think we've seen over and over again that our system is working, whether it's that scenario with facility 3 turning in a timely sample and being shut down and movement stopped and trace animals taken off the landscape, no positive, or we saw it in the Duval County scenario where even if we didn't have that post-mortem sample, we had a live testing makeup requirement that showed a positive, and movement was shut down. We've had no trace animals out of that facility. It shows that we're staying on top of this disease. It's all about early detection and stopping movement, and that's what we continue to see. All of these rules that we're talking about, it's unfortunate that they're all came to life because we had one of our farms banking samples, which will never happen again. But because that farm was able to legally stay open for business after unknowingly having a CWD positive animal die in their pens, we had infected animals shipped off of that site and onto other breeding facilities, and that's unfortunate on a lot of levels. But this right here, I to answer your question, I hope I did. I think you should have confidence yourself that it doesn't exist in your pens. If you're submitting your samples on time and you're following through on your end of the deal, then you should have confidence that CWD doesn't exist in your pens. Kevin?
Yes. I saw another question come up about turnaround times on tests. And so what we saw this summer with that, extremely tight turnaround time, we saw the lab working at about a 20 to 24 day pace. So anywhere from, let's say, 3 to 4 week turnaround time is basically what they averaged this summer during the height of the emergency rules. But that being said, it'll ebb and flow somewhat based on demand, meaning that right now they're catching up and they've got they've got a turnaround time that's yet to be really determined, but hopefully 3 weeks on stuff that they're just getting, that's already been submitted. But in the summertime, you cannot afford to wait until August to submit samples, because that's when they'll receive, in July and August, they'll receive a good number of those. And so you don't want to get caught in a situation where there's a backlog, or there, heaven forbid, another shortage of something. So yeah, it's gonna ebb and flow a little bit based on demand.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with that. I think our Keith, thank you for the question. I think our industry, everybody is procrastinators, and I think the more we can get an idea of what we're going to sell, and it might be different for everyone. I sell all my 3-year-olds. I don't sell anything other than that. So my 2-year-olds right now, I'm going to get them lined up to be tested all by, hopefully by the end of January, they're tested. But I think it's, and under that scenario, I've got 8 months before I need to move them. So I'm not going to be pushing it. I would count on 3 weeks to get test results. My actual opinion is I think they'll ramp that up. I think they'll be running probably 2-week turnaround on those samples, just because they'll be able to spread them out over such a longer amount of time and not be all coming in at the same time. You have to understand that in August every year, that's typically one of the highest months as far as running antemortem tests, because we have people that are in the past have turned non-movement qualified in by the late spring when the renewal comes around, because they didn't meet the testing protocols, and so they are already sending a lot of samples in, just like the Duval County guy did every August, would do that just so he could regain movement qualified status to be able to move animals. So and speaking of Duval, I had another question that says, since the positive in Duval County, why haven't they set up a place you could take your harvested deer to pull the lymph node and obex? Jeff, the answer to that question is because it doesn't exist. There's been no surveillance zone set up in the Duval County case. And so as of right now, there is no intention of testing anything else around that site for whatever reason. So there is no requirement to do any kind of required test for CWD post-mortem anything if you have a place next to them. So I had another question here. Do you see them going back to previous rules, to the previous rules over time? Reed, thank you for the question. That would be awesome at some point in time. I think over time, the more time that passes and the more antemortem test results that we have in our hand, the better chance we get. Now, we've got to pray that we don't have positives that pop up here and there or whatever. But that's just, I think that's my honest answer to that is I would really hope so. I think the only way we do that is to prove, for whatever reason, this summer, the people that are making decisions on this are hearing from Parks and Wildlife staff and from animal health staff that there is the word was pandemic. That's what was said to them. And so, you have to understand you have Parks and Wildlife staff and you have animal health staff saying that this is a big concern. It's a pandemic on the landscape. And then you have a bunch of deer breeders saying it's no big deal. We got this covered. And so I think from that perspective, we've got to let some time go by, and we've got to be able to speak from strength when it comes to that. And having, as Kevin said in the beginning of this, there's a lot of confidence that comes when you're selling deer to someone and it's got a not detected CWD test result on it to feel that we're not sending infected animals anywhere. that being said, at what point does that, seem like a, overbearing deal? Like I said earlier, I'm going to stay in the animal health program because I'm viewing it, because I don't view it as a big inconvenience as far as the paperwork and whatever, and I view it as an insurance policy down the road. I'm hopeful that level heads can prevail in all this, and we can say, okay, what does it mean to really be a certified herd? And there's some value given to that. And so, that's the only way I really see it going back to the previous rules. They want to have, increased surveillance, um, you know, and I don't know that the people necessarily disagree with some of that. It's just the antemortem testing on, prior to release. That's the big thing for me personally. So, Kevin, anything else?
Well, you know, John and I and several others and a lot of membership worked this summer real hard to try to influence a different outcome on these rules with staff, and we did understand the need for increased surveillance, as John mentioned earlier. But we feel like that we have um, made our point through the 12,000 tests this summer with no detections, that the rules don't have to look like this moving forward. But they just voted them in, and so um, our our push is still going to be for advocating for fair rules. It's just that those discussions now will transition from trying to convince staff and the commission um, that the rules should look a little different to convincing our legislators downtown of that. And we have worked together all summer long. We have made some great relationships at the Capitol. We've made some points at meetings at the Capitol. We have our voices being heard, and I'm convinced that our state legislators are watching this and kind of interested in it. So my point is the we have an opportunity at the legislator to address these rules through legislation that would have potentially have an outcome of the rules looking a little more favorable for us moving forward.
Well, we're getting close to a little past our hour, and to respect everyone else's time, I guess we can go ahead and close it here. I want to ask if Kevin or John have any last comments they'd like to make before we adjourn.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in right quick. This is Kevin again, DVC. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this webinar, and I want to specifically thank John for his continued involvement at all the meetings at Parks and Wildlife, all the meetings at the Capitol, and everything in between, emails, phone calls, late night talks, everything. He has represented the TDA and all deer breeders very, very well over this summer and spring, and I know he's committed to continuing that those efforts. So thank you, John.
Absolutely, Kevin. Thank you, and likewise. It's we are more aligned than ever. I think as an industry in Texas here, and it's I think we're all on the same page. We went through a spring and summer of really needing some common sense things, answers, and scenarios working at the Capitol, and I think that's all it takes. I know I will say to our industry, anybody that's on the phone right now, continued involvement, whether it's at Parks and Wildlife or at the Capitol, is so needed. And don't let this stuff get you down. Don't give up, and don't quit fighting, and don't stop standing up for yourself and the industry, because we're the only ones that know exactly what we go through and how hard these rules really are on us, and they need to hear it from you. And I know at the last couple of meetings we had kind of a trailing number of breeders, and I'm so appreciative of the ones that continued to show up. But we always need to show up and support our industry every chance we get. Kevin and I are fighting every day, all day for this stuff for the industry. And between TDA and DBC, we're in a great place. We need to have the support of the entire industry. Like I said, whether it's just behind us in person or submitting or reaching out to representatives and senators or whatever it could be. We just need people to stick together and stay strong and understand, keep an eye on the big picture of all this, and know that we're aligned and united, and we're going to do everything we can, especially going to the next legislative session. You have our full commitment to stay focused on this. So thank you Grayson, thanks for your help. Kevin, thank you so much, and appreciate everybody's involvement.
Yeah, absolutely. For everyone who still has more questions, if you would like to ask any more, feel free to reach out to the Texas Deer Association office or the DVC, and Kevin and John would be happy to help, or you can just send an email to info@texasdeerassociation.com, and we would be glad to answer your questions or put you in contact with the right person. Once again, thank you, John and Kevin, for being here. And with that, we will close. Thank you all.
Thank you.